Greetings gamers, my name is Anto. Welcome into another world building stream. I hope you are all well. I've immediately checked the audio and I know that it sounds good, so we don't have any confusion and paranoia this evening. We're straight into it. I'm immediately more chill than usual because I know that you can hear me. So hello everybody, how are we all? Welcome back to another world building stream. If this is your first time joining us, what we're going to be doing this evening is we're going to be diving into my homebrew setting of Ishtar, doing some world building stuff. This evening we're going to be focusing on the origin of elves in my world, because I was doing some writing for SIDEQUEST magazine last week and it involved some writing for elves, and I was like, I actually don't know where elves came from in my world, like on a big scale. I know some of the details, but not all of the details, and I'd like to figure out those details. So I figured we'd do a stream and dive into those nitty-gritty details, because that's the stuff that I love doing here on the stream. As always, please do get involved in the chat, say hello, throw ideas out, ask questions. It's always heaps more fun the more folks get involved in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and make sure all of the buttons and whirly jobs are pressed whilst we wait for the notifications to go out to everyone so they can join us in for this evening. I want to know, while we are waiting, tell me the most interesting thing that happened in your game this week. For me, it's my players. We realized that they haven't had a long rest in like 2 months of real world time, and they're back to back fights, and they've just gone into another fight, and they're really suffering for not having long rested in so long. So I want to know what's the most interesting thing that's been going on in your games this week. While I finish getting everything set up, we wait for folks to get in and we gear up for an evening of juicy world building. I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to this view here, so we've got the view of the Jewel Cities here in Legend Keeper, which is where we're going to be doing most of the world building this evening. Oh dear me, been a month I couldn't play and next session got cancelled. Scheduling is the real BBG. It's funny, every year when I do my audience survey, without fail, the most common complaint, I have a section for what's your biggest struggle as a game master, what's your biggest struggle as a player, and in both categories the biggest struggle is scheduling, without a doubt, every single time. I really should do some kind of video about scheduling and trying to overcome common pitfalls. I do think it is on the docket for this year. I think I put it on the list when we were doing the big list of 2025 videos. Right, so this evening we are focusing on the elves. So let's jump in here and grab the page for the elves. Bob says, for me, my characters rolled a random ship encounter and they rolled for a kraken ritual. They failed to stop the ritual and the session ended with a juvenile kraken appearing. I love that. Always good when krakens appear in ship-based encounters. Holidays don't really help with all the family gatherings and things, though. No, absolutely not. We took about a month off, which is why it's been almost 2 months since they've had a long rest in real time. They've not their characters haven't rested since the end of November. And we took a chunk of December and January off. And now they're going into a big fight with just nothing in the tank on almost any of them. And it's going to be fun to see how they get out of that. So, this evening, we are going to be focusing on the origin of elves in my world. Like I said, I was writing for SideQuest magazine this week, and I was doing some stuff on elves. And I realized that beyond some very surface level stuff, I don't actually know a lot about the elves in my world and their origin. All I really know about the elves is that they're thought to be descended from the creatures of the Feywild, and they're directly tied to the Fey. And that's, for a long time, that's all I really knew about the elves. And today we're going to figure out what their deal is. Jonathan says, yo, big fan, what is the application you use? Welcome in and glad to hear that you're a fan. The application that we're using this evening is Legend Keeper. I think I have a button that will do the thing. Let's see. Does it do the thing? It does do the thing. There, I have a video diving into Legend Keeper and giving an introduction on how I use it and all that good stuff. Linked in the chat. It's almost like I do this for a job. It's almost like I'm a professional. But don't accuse me of that. It's an insult. Still not even 1 day of world time in 2 months. Yeah, it's been a long day for them. Incredibly long. We might be getting on for it being the record for the longest day they've had in terms of real world time for in-game time. But I'm a stickler for making sure that we run, not all the time, but occasionally we will have like protracted days so that they don't always just take it for granted that they're going to get a rest, because it makes it so that they are always mindful of their resource management, because obviously their rests and resources is one of the dials that I have as a dungeon master to play around with, especially in 5th edition, where so much can be gotten back with a short rest especially, or a long rest. Playing with time and the availability of rests is a really good way to put additional pressure on the player characters, and making it so that it's just event after event after event and there is no space to rest really forces them to get like really mindful about how they're using their abilities, and it forces a style of gameplay that I really enjoy in small amounts. I don't think I'd want to see that kind of gameplay week in, week out for like 3 years, but as an occasional little treat, just to remind them that they're in a dangerous world and they need to be aware of that and they need to prepare for these situations, always a good thing. So then, Elves. As I said, all I know about the Elves, well, not all I know, the main thing that I know about the Elves are that the Elves are broken into two kind of distinct groups on the material plane. We're going to need to open multiple tabs for this. This is going to be a multiple visual aids evening. So, we have got the World of Ishtar here. This is the map of the World of Ishtar. Let's move it around so that we can see everything properly. And then let's grab our planes of existence as well, because this is going to come in handy. We're going to want to reference the Feywild. So Elves on Ishtar, broken into predominantly two groups. There are the Inyarin Elves, who are based out of this enormous forest off in the east on the continent of Valen. This forest, known as the Everglades, is like hundreds of miles of forest, and that's like the ancestral home of Elves on Ishtar. It's where they first came to this world. It's where most of their history is. It's where most of the kind of elven blood hails from. And the big thing with Inyarin is for a long time the cities there were kind of hidden. The capital is called the Hidden City, and they kind of hid themselves away from the world while they were dealing with a big old problem going on over there. The other major sect of elves that we have in Ishtar at the moment, in kind of like the canon, are the elves from what was the Eltrith Dominion, that is now the Howling Badlands. So this region over in Talavar, known as the Howling Badlands, is like a fantasy nuclear wasteland. It's like a fantasy nuke went off and irradiated this whole area with incredibly potent magics and turned what was once a lush forest into an irradiated red desert. And there is a tribe of elves there that ruled over this region when it was still known as the Eltrith Dominion. They are now kind of infused with this like magical radiation. So they all have like a red tint to their skin from this massive magical radiation, as do the dwarves that are living there. And they live very differently to the Inyaran elves. So we've got Inyaran elves, Eltrith elves. Those are kind of like the two flavor of domestic elves, mortal elves, material plane elves that we have in our world. Then we have a couple of different kind of elemental elves, and I think of those as almost like the seasons or celestial elves. So there are elves that are associated with the sun. Those are the Ravi or the Ravi. And there are elves that are associated with the moon. Those are the Vestal. I have a little bit of information on both of those. And I think I've got astral elves as well, but I don't have anything written about them, I don't think. So I know that there are sort of 4 or 5 kind of separate factions of elves within the Ishtar setting, but I don't know a huge amount of information about kind of where they came from and what their kind of high level kind of deal is, in terms of, if we compare it to dwarves, for example, the original dwarves were carved from stone by the god Kovaz the smith and infused with magic and brought to life. Like, I know the origin story of the dwarves, but I don't know that for the elves. So what I want to try and figure out today is some of those origin level details, or figure out some of what they believe to be their origins. So I'm going to start with the Inyaran elves, because those are the oldest sect of elves on the material plane, and then kind of work out from there and expand from there. So if we click on it, we have from the setting guide. Meanwhile, Pathfinder elves are aliens. Basically, like, I know that the elves in this setting originally came from the Feywild. They are not native to this plane, so alien in that sense. And Drow lies. Oh, yeah, we haven't even talked about Drow. We'll get to Drow. We'll get to Drow. So Inyaran is, like I said, a massive forest region, and I'm sure that I had made some spicy notes somewhere. Is it in here? It's not in Doppelganger. Thought I had made notes, but apparently I had not. Eltrith elves. Is this where I had made it? I made notes somewhere. There we go. I knew I had made some like pre-prep notes for this so that I wasn't going in blind, but I couldn't remember where. But it's in the elf list. Cool. So cosmic origins, I know roughly that they originally hail from the Feywild. That's all we need immediately. Then in terms of their relationship with the gods, this is something that I was thinking when I was trying to kind of condense what I know about elves to prep for the stream. I don't think that the elves as a whole, as a kind of collective peoples, worship the gods on Ishtar, which is an interesting design space to be, an interesting narrative space to be, because the gods absolutely categorically exist and are like proven they have interacted with the world. So any large group that goes, no, we just don't worship, it's a bold statement for any group to make when they choose not to pay any kind of homage to any sort of god in any sort of way. And I was thinking back on all the campaigns that I've run now in Ishtar, and I've had quite a few large elf settlements. I've had a large segment of my first campaign took place in Eltrith, in the Elf Dominion, and none of them were particularly pious. So I think there's going to be, they are going to have a very interesting relationship with the gods, and that might manifest as they just flat out are like, no, we do not recognize the gods, we do not worship these gods, we worship like Bob says, our own version of gods. They might worship those that came before, because the gods, the current pantheon on Ishtar is not the first. Or it could be that the elves simply say to us, gods are not divine beings, they are just any creature powerful enough to call itself a god and defend that claim, so we refuse to pay deference to them and support that claim when, you know, any of us could call ourselves a god if we were just powerful enough to defend it. This is something that I have kind of established within my world a couple times. Like, the gods in this world really are they're just dudes. Like, if you are powerful enough to call yourself a god and smite anyone that says otherwise, then you're a god, basically. Like, if you have the magic to be able to bestow gifts upon people and to be able to defend your claim and imbue others with power, if it walks like a god and talks like a god and acts like a god, then it's a god. That kind of situation. Chicane says, could they feel that they came into existence when the gods did, so feel somehow separate from worshipping them? Possibly, having them tied to kind of the timing of the new gods. Let's also open up another tab with the Pantheon and have a cursory look over the gods. So this is my main level Pantheon page. This mess of a table shows the deities, their titles, their alignments, their domains, what their symbol is, any heralds and saints they have, their original names, so if I have drawn inspiration from different kind of translated words in languages and stuff, what their corresponding tarot card and number is, because I use a lot of tarot and the upright and reverse meanings of tarot, because I use a lot of tarot information for divining kind of the gods stuff, and then which deck of many things card they're related to, because I like to do a lot of divination style stuff, kind of portents and fortune telling, that kind of stuff. So looking through the gods, we've got Alasia, who's the god of time. I don't like that for the elves. We've got the defender, Aldafe, who is the goddess of protection. We've got Edifice, the farmer. Hector's asking if he's the only one that's got stream lags. Let me have a look on OBS and see whether there's any warnings. I'm not seeing any dropped frames or warnings, and I will just unmute YouTube. It seems to be alright for me. There's a little bit of delay from when I speak to when it comes through to YouTube, but that's always kind of the case. Then we have Ilaria, the Wanderer, who is, or the Traveller, as she is actually called, who is the goddess of the planes and moving from one plane to another, and the goddess of kind of liberation and freedom. If they were going to worship a god, I feel like Ilaria would be a really good shout, because Ilaria is very much about kind of the transition between places, and given that they started in the Feywild and have come to the material plane, Ilaria would be a strongish bet. Certainly the Vestal, who are the Moon Elves, would probably worship Ilaria because she is the goddess of the moon. Then we've got Hagen, the warrior. I don't like that for elves as a collective. Cardia, the maiden, she's the goddess of love. I don't think that fits with the perception of elves that we currently have. Clavo, the trickster, again, doesn't fit. Koros, the goddess of decay. Kovas, the smith. Ket, the mutilator, who's the god of murder. Noctis, the god of nightmares. Onira, the god of dreams. Parax, the warmaster, who's kind of the god of tyranny. Pravis, the corruptor, who's like the god of vice and demons. Sedna, the tempest. Sophos, the grandfather, who's kind of like the classic tippy top of the pantheon god. Teras, the monster, who's one of the old gods, the Everlight, who is the goddess of the sun, Traxico, the bard, Trelos, the seeker, who's this kind of split personality god of magic. He would be my other contender for elves. And Valois, the thief, so the god of thievery. So of the kind of new gods, my two top picks would be Alaria the Traveller and Trelos the Seeker. And of those two, I think Trelos is more interesting because I've not done really anything with that god at all. So Trelos is the god of magic and ambition, and within the setting kind of was told like not to look in Pandora's box by Sophos, and was like, don't look at this dangerous magic because it'll drive you absolutely insane. And Trelos was like, but I love knowledge, I'm gonna look in the box, and looked in the box and saw kind of like the untempered schism of magic, and it like fractured him, and he is now like this split personality god that at the same time wants to seek all knowledge of magic but also wants to like utterly destroy magic. And then I've not explored Trelos through player facing stuff a lot yet, and I think that could be an interesting way to do it, but it's quite high concept. But I'm open to the idea. Bob says, there are any lost faded gods? There's a whole bunch. So we've got a bunch of primordial gods. So those are the original kind of draconic gods of the world. Ishtar, which is what the world is named after, is one of these. Ishtar the Watcher. And then the classic like Bahamut and Tiamat. These are the primordial gods that existed prior to the kind of current age. Jenat says, I have a question about races, since this is the topic of the stream. How do you go about deciding what aspects of culture, beliefs, etc. tied to races, and which to origin, city, nation, etc.? I don't think I have one specific approach on how to do that for my world specifically. A lot of it comes from kind of discovering it as I go. A lot of the way that I will build, a lot of the way that I write and create has always been it's always been a process of kind of discovery and feeling almost like I'm an archaeologist and these things have always existed, and somewhere in my mind the complete version of this world exists, and I'm just like chipping away at the rock to expose it. And a lot of the time it feels less like I'm making things as it is discovering them. And specifically when it comes to kind of race and ancestry and species, and what to tie to kind of that innate part of them versus culture, it's a lot of it is what I will go through and decide. Like with the dwarves are a really good example. Dwarves in my setting, they believe that they were made by the god of smithing and made from like a magic rock that infused with life. And from that I kind of discovered that, oh well, when dwarves age they start to petrify, so they don't die of old age, they slowly kind of lose their magic and turn back into stone. So that is core to the dwarves as people, regardless of the city or nation or culture that they're a part of. That is core to dwarves as a people, and it informs everything about them regardless of where they are. How they choose to, what they choose to do with that information can be very different. So in Valen, in Oxthorn, which is kind of the ancestral seat of the dwarves, they treat it as kind of like a great honor. When they petrify, they are taken back to their capital city, into these great vaults underneath the city, and they believe one day all those stone soldiers are going to be called upon to fight for their god once more. But over in Talavar, you've got a sect of dwarves called the Cinder Dwarves, who use that irradiated magic sand from the like nuclear wasteland to prolong their lives and hold off the process of petrification, and that kind of slowly drives them mad over time. So both these cultures are dealing with the same, they're culturally dealing with the same like biological thing. So you've got this dwarves turn to stone when they die as kind of a core element of the race, and then you've got two elements on the other side of the world that deal with it very, very differently. And that is something that I will tend to do quite frequently, especially with non-human species, is I will try and find at least two very different approaches. So with dwarves, for example, two opposite ends of the spectrum for how they deal with their innate kind of defining ancestral feature. In terms of making kind of like racial based nations and cities, I have regions where so for the elves, the area that the elves have in Yaren is the ancestral home for the elves. It's where you will go and you will find the highest concentration of the kind of pure blood descended from the Fae elves, with kind of like their purple eyes, and they look very much like the elves in Hellboy, like alabaster, like platinum hair, purple eyes. That's where you find the highest concentration of Inyaran elves. But there are also the whole spectrum of other species that you'll find in my world there. Similarly, in Oxdorn, that's the ancestral home of the dwarves, but it's not just dwarves that you'll find there. And then outside of those two places, I think, I'm just trying to think if I've got any other kind of mono species home bases. So the Howling Badlands is elves and dwarves. But outside of Inyaran and Oxdorn, which are kind of some of my earliest areas of development, everywhere else is much more of like a mix of people. Daniel says, only come here to say I love the memes. The YouTube app always recommends them to me, so I'll look and let you know the person behind you. Have a good stream. Welcome in. I'm glad that you enjoy the memes. I think that starting with this group of people, this species has their own city or their own state, and this is where they can all be found, is fairly common. It's the standard fantasy trope. Like I say, when you look at the map of Ishtar, you see Inyaran and Oxdorn are kind of like the two big examples of it, because Valen was the first continent that was kind of developed for the setting, and this sort of western coast was the first part of that. So it was like human land in the middle, and then dwarves to the south, elves to the north, and then sort of the Deadlands is all undeady. But then as it's expanded out, everywhere else is more of just a mix. So it then becomes, how do you contextualize why those two places in particular are more kind of monocultural than anywhere else? And a big part of that is for the elves, because that's what we're talking about today. Inyaran is kind of like their ancestral home, but it's also magic, and they have magically protected it. So for several hundred years, they had a kind of plague going on in the forest called the Grey Sickness. There was an undead scourge rampaging through the forest. A whole bunch of the elves left and kind of went into the Feywild because they were like, no, we don't want to get turned into undead. We're noping out of this plane. And most of the cities got glamoured, so the elven cities within Inyaran are just mostly invisible if you don't know where they are. And then there's a whole bunch of protections and stuff. And it's a very isolationist region, which is why it has remained predominantly elven. And then that's another thing that kind of separates the way that you perceive Inyaran elves with Eltrith elves. So Inyaran elves are very insular, very like, no, we're going to stay in our forest and we don't care about the outside world, we don't care about outsiders, we're just very inwards looking. Whereas the Eltrith elves don't have a homeland anymore because it was destroyed by this magical irradiation. So their entire culture is about kind of finding new home. Each one of the tribes, they all carry little pockets of seeds so that if they ever find a place suitable, they can kind of replant their forest. And their dream is to be able to regrow the forests of Eltrith in somewhere within this irradiated wasteland and kind of grow a new green place. Very Mad Max vibes. They ride around on like red lightning powered skiffs. But their approach to life and their philosophy is very different than the elves on the other side of the world. And I think that that's one of kind of the most important things to do in fantasy, is show that the non-humanoid species and the humanoids, non-human species and the humans, but show them that they're all not just one kind of collective. You can't just look at one place and one group and go, that's what I can expect from every single elf that I meet. That's not what I can expect from every kobold that I can meet. And it will make it much more interesting. But at the same time, you want a kind of linchpin and a kind of archetypal version of each of these groups that you can refer back to, because then you have ways to make the differences different. So if you know that the typical Eastern elf is very insular, very inward looking, very isolationist, then if the players are adventuring in Valen in the East, so if they're over here adventuring and they meet a white elf from Inyaran that isn't super isolationist, but that is like really forward looking and outward looking, that is a stark point of contrast to what they would expect. So there is benefit in having like some stereotype established within the world, as long as you're not like bringing in real world stereotypes to lean on. So for our elves, in terms of their relationships with the god, I'm going to put a little note that I like the idea of them possibly being tied to Trelos, the Seeker. And again, I'm going to have a quick look at Trelos. God of magic, an ambition, father's most studious pupil, learning from magic that fuels creation. He gifted the mortals with magic. I don't think that that is actually true anymore. So we're going to delete that, because I think the mortals got magic from Ishtar's body. Sophos warned Trelos that magic is dangerous, and that some magics even his children were forbidden to explore. Trelos didn't listen. He studied the darkest secrets and knowledge, and the knowledge gained drove him mad. Torn creature simultaneously trying to preserve magic and destroy it makes him difficult to predict and control. So that's vague enough to give us some direction. And he is based in the realm of knowledge, which is Iroh. So how then would that connect to the Feywild if the elves were from the Feywild? So I think instead of having, again, speaking to that monoculture element, instead of having all elves have a relationship with Trelos the Seeker, I like the idea of there being a sect of elves that have a relationship with Trelos the Seeker. And I actually think that astral elves might be the ones for this. So we go, one sect of elves has a relationship with Trelos the Seeker. Elder says, hi, Anto, just stopping by to say hi. Almost TPK'd my party with 5 shadows and I am beat. Welcome in. I'm glad you're stopping by. I hope you enjoy some well-earned rest after a TPK. Maybe they want travelers to get the knowledge of how to travel permanently, possibly. Let's make a note that possibly the Astral Elves. So if we go down the line here, and maybe that's the easiest thing to do, and go in Yarin, and then Eltrith, and then Ravi, and Vestal. Ravi and Vestal are really easy to figure out what their relationship to the gods are. Vestal are moon elves, so they would be strongly tied to Ilaria. I cannot type. Ilaria the Traveller. And the Ravi would be closely associated with the Everlight, who is the goddess of the sun. So that's like half our elves done. We only need to figure out what the relationship with the Inyarin and Eltrith elves are. So the Eltrith elves are a people who have had their homeland destroyed. They are living in a wasteland of nuclear irradiation. Welcome in, Jess. Nice to see you. And in terms of their relationship to the gods, if they're going to have a relationship with anyone, I think they would probably have a relationship with Edifice the Farmer. So their whole shtick is, we want to bring back the green place. So they would have a connection to the god that they would think that could make that happen, which would be the god of the harvest, the god of the bounty, the god of plant life, all of that kind of jazz. And having this kind of group of elves that are broken into multiple tribes, and their kind of unifying thing is they pray to the god of the harvest that eventually they're going to find this fertile land that they can regrow their home. So let's go tied to Edifice the Farmer. I forgot his name. The Howling Badlands, the irradiation was caused by a magic bomb that was potentially set off by the dwarves, potentially set off by the elves. They argue about who set it off, who is to blame. It was infused with a magical substance called cinder, which is what prolongs the dwarves' lives and stops them from petrifying, but it has the side effect of filling them with rage. Gives them like the mechanical effects of rage, so it gives them resistances, makes them stronger and stuff, but also like actually makes them full of rage, like 28 Days Later style. And the only place that cinder can be found is within this band of what is now the Howling Badlands, what was then the Eltrith Dominion. The dwarves arrived, the elves lived there. The dwarves are like, really cool rocks that you've got there. We would kind of like those rocks, and they went to war. And then at some point during that war, a cinder bomb was detonated, and there's big old arguments as to whether the dwarves did it or the elves did it. I don't know who did it, is the honest answer. I have no idea. Maybe they used to pray to the god of destruction, which happened to assist with radiation. I think that the god of destruction, so Ket, is too violent for what the Eltrith elves are. I think that there would definitely be a subsect of cinder dwarves who have got a little bit of a hard-on for Ket because the rage-fueled bloodlust from the cinder. And again, the god of war, Hagen, the Eltrith elves aren't so much in a war footing. They are more of like a nomadic, displaced people looking for a new home. So I think Edifice the Farmer, this nurturing figure of finding a new green place, works with them. But in terms of Inyarin, I think Inyarin might be an atheist, or a godless sect of elves that basically refuse to acknowledge the authority of the gods and pretty much just say, no, there's only like one top of the pyramid in terms of the power in this world now, and that's us. And I like that because you've got the stereotype of the arrogant elf, and I think that is a stereotype that so many people will come into a game like D&D or any fantasy setting with that expectation, and I like to have somewhere that is true. And the Inyarin elves, they are just the perfect encapsulation of that stereotype, and applying that to their relationship with the gods would be like, no, we're just better than the gods. We don't worship because why would we? We're like better than them. And I just like that concept. So we're going to go with Inyarin elves specifically refuse to pay homage to any gods and consider themselves to be the greatest beings on Ishtar. But then parentheses, now that the Akmiri are dead. So the Akmiri was an empire of people that were the height of magic and technology in my world for 1,000 years. And whilst their empire was ruling over Ishtar, there were sky cities. The magic and technology of the world was far more advanced than it is now. And then there was a great cataclysm, and basically in the blink of an eye, all their cities fell from the sky, and all of the Akmiri were destroyed and became bodiless. The few that still survive are just like formless creatures that exist as beings of pure energy. And I like the idea that the Inyarin elves are like, well, now that those losers are dead, we are the top dogs, so we're not going to worship the gods because we are the gods on earth, and really hype up that elven arrogance. Inyarin elves, who is the leader? So does this leader make others pray to them instead? I don't think that it's going to be a case of they expect others to pray to them like we are gods. It's more of a case of we are clearly the superior group on this planet, so we will not worship anyone because there is no one above us. But I don't think that they would have others worship them, because I specifically like the idea of them being godless, and then them thinking of themselves as gods kind of skews in the face of that, and it also makes them less like funny arrogant and much more like ew arrogant. If they're like, we rebuke the gods, but you have to worship at our feet, is a much grosser arrogance that I don't want them to have. Because I'm keeping in mind that if a player comes into the campaign and is playing an Inyarin elf, is playing one of the white elves, then they can play into this arrogance and be like, oh, well, I don't worship the gods. Why would I? My people are the best. But if they expect people to worship them, then that creates a just gross dynamic within a group, because you've got an Inyarin elf who's like, why are you not worshipping me, peasants? And that's not a space that I want to foster within like group dynamics. And it would be way too easy for people to fall into that if the Inyarin elves are like, yeah, you should be worshipping us actively. So I much prefer the ideas of them being godless. And then in terms of what we've got here, so Raven Vestal, we've already covered those. Oh, that's deleted way too much. It's the elves in Valen, the Yaran elves. Some notes on them. They consider themselves to be greatest beings on Ishtar. So the hidden city is the capital of Inyaran. It is Glamored. It's not how you spell Glamored. How do you spell Glamored? Maybe that's good enough. Glamored, so that only those who have been there know where it is. And this is the same for all of the elven cities in Yaren. I don't recall exactly when it happened. I do have it somewhere in my first campaign notes, when this kind of glamoring happened, when the elves kind of hid all of their cities. But the hidden city is the capital. Glamored, so only people who know where it is can see it. So if you want to get there, you have to be escorted by someone who knows where it is. The Grey Sickness was an undead plague that was rife in the forest for a few hundred years. It's sorted now, though. The Exodus during the Great Sickness. Most of the Inyaran elves left the material plane and went to the Feywild. And then the return, they came back. The Eltrith elves, the Eltrith Dominion got blown up during the Cinder War, Red Death. Don't need to recover all that. The Drow. The Drow are a funny one because the Drow are, up until this point, the Drow were the only group of elves that I knew had an explicit religious provocation. So Drow, all the Drow that my players have encountered through our campaigns have been servants of Lycia, who is the mother of spiders, the mother of whispers, like my world's version of Lolth. And up until this point, those are the only elves that my players have encountered that have any kind of religious disposition. And now that I'm thinking about it, I actually think that is quite interesting. I like keeping the Inyaran elves as godless, and then having like the Drow, the servants of Lycia, having them be changed by their worship, perhaps. Dice Legend says, "Hey there, just popping in for a few minutes between work tasks, so you're live and thought to say hi. Welcome in. Thank you for joining us. We're figuring out the origins of elves in my world because it's high time, because I'm like 3 campaigns in and I still don't know all of the origins of elves in my world. So in terms of the Drow, I like the idea that the reason Drow are distinct from other elves is because of this worship of Lycia, and that if we're keeping the kind of religious elements of it going, all of the elves, if the Inyaran elves are kind of like the first elves, and then Eltrith elves are visually distinct because they've been irradiated by magical like fallout, and then Ravi are visually distinct because they are worshippers of the sun goddess and they kind of like absorb solar radiation as part of their worship. Vestal are worshippers of the moon goddess and they undergo a process that makes them like functionally blind but allows them to see the Door Roshana, which is the tapestry of the universe, and allows them to like read the future. There's a whole thing with Vestal. The Drow would be distinct from Inyaran Elves because of their worship of Lycia, and which would suggest any elf could become a Drow, maybe? That they're not necessarily distinct like species thing. It's more of a change that happens as a result of their worship of the deity, which could be something interesting to explore, and definitely something that I'm going to need to ponder on. Algathar, welcome to the Black Vaults of Iroh. Glad to have you. So for anyone that doesn't know, I'll switch back to the old face cam so you get the little advertisement at the bottom. I have channel memberships enabled on the channel, so if you want to get even more like deep dives into my world building process and more nitty gritty videos on my world and stuff like that, the channel memberships are the best way to do that. I will be doing a video later this month where I basically do a whole tour of my planes of existence and go through every single plane and talk about them in depth. And then I'm pretty much gonna go like top level down, drill all the way down from the top of the cosmos in a video, and then go to the world of Ishtar and kind of like do a tour of all of the known areas of Ishtar in another video for channel members, and then like highlight some specific places. We'll do a video on the deities and like deep dive into the deities and give like summaries on all of them. So if the stuff that we've been doing here in these streams is interesting to you and you want even more like deep dive stuff into that, the channel membership's absolutely the best way to do that, and you get early access to the videos, like the regular channel videos. Like I just uploaded the 1st of February's videos today, because January is always a really slow month for YouTube, so I'm taking January off from like normal content, so I won't be posting like regular videos until February, but I have put the first of those up for channel members so they can check that out and check out the introduction for the brand new campaign diaries, because that is one of the most commonly requested video series to come back, is the campaign diaries. I used to do campaign diaries, kind of going over what was going on in my world week to week, and it never performed super well with the algorithm, but the people that watched them like really loved them, and it by far the most commonly requested thing to bring back. So I thought I'd bring it back for channel members. The first of those went up for members today, and will go up for everyone else next month sometime. Agatha says, thank you. Your content allowed me to rediscover an old and loved hobby. I'm so glad. That warms my heart, truly. Bob says, for this idea on the drow, then I like the idea of an elf can become a drow, so therefore Lycia may want those followers to corrupt any elf, especially in Yarn. Like, I like that there is an element of corruption to the drow. Do I like that, actually? Is that playing into like old and tired drow are evil tropes? That might require more pondering, because I do like the idea of the drow are drow because they're tied to Lycia and to the spider goddess, and I think there is something there, but I do think that it like runs the risk of treading on like tired old tropes of, well, all drow are evil then. That's not necessarily what I want, because again, I'm thinking we've got a drow player in the party. How is that going to manifest? How are people going to treat them? What's their experience going to look like if it's just a well-known fact that all drow are evil? So I like the idea of maybe it being not necessarily a an active thing that the drow do to corrupt other elves. Like they don't like steal other elves from their homes and like forcibly corrupt them. It's more of a take it down like the logical route of, we've been talking all about like religion and the concept of how elves worship. Take it down the idea of the drow are sort of like not necessarily religious zealots, but they are fundamentalists. So the drow would be, you'd find like drow missionaries approaching elven settlements being like, hey, have you heard the word of Lycia? Like, you know, this surface world freaking sucks. I'm imagining them approaching some Eltrith elves and being like, the surface world sucks, dwarves blew up your homeland, have you heard the word of Lycia? Come to the world below and like bask in Lycia's embrace, and take that kind of approach with it versus the more directly evil, we're gonna violently convert. It's more, I don't want to say a settler evil, but that's absolutely what I mean, is a settler evil of a like faith persuasion conversion. As a player, I'd be so hyped to help an elf go to temple community from transition to a drow. Yeah, I think that's a much more interesting space to explore than like a typical sort of review of corruption. They don't need to be evil, just need to convince religious wise. Oh yeah, exactly. Don't need to be evil. It's just a case, yeah, they are sort of like, this should be, nope. Why are you being weird? Why are you being weird? It's because it's set to heading 3, that's why. There we go. Religious fundamentalists. Who attempt to convert other elves to worship of Lycia. So this idea of Aza says, what software do you use, if I may ask? Of course you may ask. I use Legend Keeper, which is a campaign management tool and has a whole bunch of features. I've got a video that goes over kind of a high level overview of everything that it can do, which I will link down in the chat for you. So the drow would be like religious fundamentalists who attempt to convert other elves to the worship of Lycia. So in terms of inspiration, it'd be looking to specifically a lot of US based religious groups, because that kind of like solicitation of religion certainly isn't something that I've experienced widely here in the UK, and it seems like a distinctly like US phenomenon, the sort of degree to which it happens. So that seems like the easiest place to go to look for inspiration would be like those like missionary groups that go around the country knocking on doors being like, have you heard the good word? And given the kind of tone that we want to set, it would be a case of trying to find the line of, we don't want it to come across as like Book of Mormon, because we don't want it to just immediately be an obviously satirical, dismissible thing, because the drow themselves believe it. And again, we're trying to create space for a player character to be a drow, and for that not to be a source of mockery within the party. But then we also want there to be that kind of suggestion that there is something that is like just uneasy. Like the way I'm picturing it, or a way to describe it, is when you are visited upon by Lycian missionaries, you get that like A24 strings in the background. That, like, if you've seen the trailer for Heretic or just any A24 film, you'll know the strings that I mean. That really unsettling music, little stinger that's like, oh, something bad is going to happen, and you don't know what it is, and you don't know what direction it's going to take. I like the feeling, or the idea that is the kind of feeling that you get from being approached by these groups of people, because obviously the elves that they are approaching, especially the Inyaran elves, are so divorced from the pantheon that there would be just this really like inherent weirdness to seeing such zealots, because even the other elves, the Ravi, the Vestal, and the Eltrith elves, they're not like zealous in their worship. The Eltrith elves are much more like attuned with nature, and actually I think Edifice might not be the one. I think I might go with Athea, the Great Mother, who is like an old depiction of the world of Ishtar. That might be the route I take for Eltrith. But like Ravi and Vestal are much more like cosmic forces, like force of nature, religion. Just this is the deity associated with that force of nature. Whereas the Drow, Lycia, is a much more like, they're much more like vocal and much more overtly religious. You know, they will have temples, they will have priests, they will have the classical structures of religion that elves in general just are not used to. So when these kind of Lycian missionaries approach other elves, I like the idea that even if everything they're saying is completely fine on the surface, that you get these A24 strings in the background, and there's something about them that will just make another elf's teeth stand on edge, or like some elves will just be really unsettled by the whole process, not necessarily unsettled by what they say, just the concept of the depths of their devotion. I like that idea that it's not who they worship, it's how they worship. So other elves have a problem with them, not because of who they worship, but how they worship. So, e.g., their zealous nature, their devotion, and their organized structure of religious worship. And then let's see where Athea, have we got a page for Athea? No, we don't. There is a mention of Athea somewhere. It is Athea the Great Mother. That is another name for the world of Ishtar. Cool. So I actually think that instead of having the Eltrith elves be tied to Edifice, the farmer, which is a new god, I like the idea of them worshipping the original version of Ishtar before it was known as Ishtar, this kind of like spirit of the earth. And they are worshippers. Not necessarily worshippers, but tied to very naturalistic approach. They are trying. This would be in Eltrith Elves. So they'd be trying to find a new green place. So So for the Drow, we've got religious fundamentalists who are attempting to convert other elves to worship Lycia. Other elves have a problem with them, not because of who they worship, Lycia, but how they worship, their religious nature, their devotion, their organised structure of religious worship. Also makes perfect sense for the Aldrath elves. They want to revert back to how it was before. Exactly. I think Athea, their worship of Ishtar, the planet, as Athea, the Great Mother, makes much more sense than a new god. And then the Ravi and Vestal being tied just to the sun and moon, and the current embodiment of those two things in deity form. It isn't so much like, oh, we worship the Everlight. It's like we worship the sun and accept that the Everlight is the deity of the sun. We worship the moon and accept that Alaria is the deity of the moon. So let's just make a note of that. Worships the sun first, accepts the Everlight as the deity of the sun. And then same with that, worships the moon first, accepts Alaria as the deity of the moon. What that does is that kind of divorces all elves beyond the Drow from traditional worship, which is what I was going for originally. I'd just been thrown by Ravi and Vestal because of their close ties to the sun and the moon. I'm doing a lot of wiggly hand motions. It's like I'm trying to cast a spell. So we've got this whole group of elves, 4 of our 5 major pillars of elves, who don't worship any gods in the traditional sense. And then we've got the Drow, who are like, we can't get enough of Lycia. So we need to make a note of the Drow here, because it's not fair that the Drow are all the way down there on their own. And then I think that there's some interesting space there with other elves having a problem with the way that the Drow worship rather than who they worship, because we can set up some instances then for players to have like preconceived notions of, oh, you're an elf, you don't like Drow because they worship the spider goddess. And then for an elf to be like, no, it's got nothing to do with the fact that they worship the spider goddess. It's the weird way in which they worship the spider goddess. We're fine with them liking the spider goddess. It's just, why do they have to go to church? And that kind of thing of like, why do they have to pray? Like that element of it. That kind of like, why is there an organized structure to this? Why do they have to be so zealous in the way that they approach this? And I think that makes it much more interesting and much more nuanced than just Drow are evil because they worship evil, therefore they are all evil as well. It's just Drow worship Lycia, the mother of Spider, the mistress of Whispers, who is just, she is who she is. And the other elves have a problem with that worship, and it's got nothing to do with who it is. It's all about how. Could it be their worship implies something along the lines, if we don't pray to our god, it would make the world end? Possibly. I don't think Lycia is kind of an apocalyptic deity. She's much more of a like behind the scenes string puller manipulation deity. I think that it's much more interesting to me if the Drow are just earnestly zealous in like, no, we worship Lycia because we genuinely think our lives are better, and like, look at us, we get to become Driders, we get to become part Spider, how freaking cool is that? And they are just like, they genuinely enjoy the whole thing, and the other elves just don't comprehend it, and it being kind of this just fundamental mismatch of the Drow are just really into it, and they're like Marge holding the potato, and they're like, we just think Lycia is neat. And the other elves are like, we just don't understand this. Why can't you just be normal? Like heretic memeing at them. Hereditary memeing at them. More, if we don't worship our gods, she'll get weak, letting other gods get more powers, destabilizing them, making them more prone to more violent ends. Possibly, there is an element within the setting of Ishtar of gods deriving their powers from worship and from kind of like the harvesting of souls. So that's an element that could kind of be implicit in all worship. But all those that follow Lycia can hear that the priest is whispering in their ear. I like that that's a nice detail. Sermons are completed in whispers. That is a really nice detail. I actually might go and make a note of that right now in the Pantheon section for Lycia, if I can remember where she is. There she is, Lycia. Are conducted in whispers. So she's the mother of Spider, mistress of whispers. Oh, where are we? Elves. That's what we want. So we know how the elves, the kind of 5 principal sects of elves, interact with religion. We're forgetting one. We're forgetting astral elves. Astral elves. Oh my god. It's because I don't have a page for astral elves, so I always forget about them. Let's see what. Do I have a page? Or the Ravi on the astral elves, are they? No, they're sun elves. I thought they were. So astral elves. We'll put them as the possible relationship with, why are you freaking out, with Trelos. And then in turn, the astral elves are so removed from all other elves because they only really exist in the astral sea, which is very nebulous. Like, I have no solid definition of what the astral sea is. If we jump over to the planes of existence, broadly, just all the bit that looks like space is the astral sea, but the astral sea is kind of like whatever I need it to be. Is it outer space to the planet of Ishtar, or is it the space between planes of existence? Yes. So the astral elves are the most nebulous elves, the ones that players are least likely to come into contact with, and the ones that need the least explanation, I think. When the world needed it most. Until returned. Yeah. It's me. Cape of billowing going mad behind me. I would absolutely have a cape of billowing. That would be probably my go-to choice for a magic item. If I could have like a common magic item, cape of billowing all day. And then for other elf stuff. So if they originally came from the Feywild, that would be the elves on Ishtar originally came from the Feywild. Alchemy cloak is the. Do you mean alchemy jug? I know how much you love the alchemy jug. Just the unlimited access to mayonnaise. Trident of occasional fish command. Oh my god. So Elves on Ishtar originally hail from the Feywild. That feels more and more like just folklore now. Really need like, do we folklore tag this? Yeah, we folklore tag this. Heward's handy hat, spice pouch, going full Samwise Gamgee. So having the elves originally hail from the Feywild, or the elves that are on Ishtar. So the Inyaran elves, which would be the first elves on Ishtar, like the white elves were the first ones to come from the Feywild. I like the idea that all elves are actually descended from astral elves. because they're kind of like the between space ones. I do like that. So that can be the folklore. And then truth is, all elves are descended from astral elves, who have at various points been shunted into different planes of existence. Excellent word, shunted. So if the astral elves are the true elves, the original, the progenitor elves, then astral elves have had a cosmic empire, and they would be in opposition to the all-seeing empire. So in my setting, there are a couple of factions that exist within the Astral Sea. So you've got your classic Gith, who still exist in the Astral Sea. You've got Mind Flayers, they exist in the Astral Sea. Then you've also got the All-Seeing Empire, which is a Beholder Empire, which exists in the Astral Sea. And the way that Beholders first came to Ishtar is as scouts, very much like the Saiyans in Dragon Ball Z. Like, come to a world, scout it out, see what potential that world has for the all-seeing empire. And that empire still exists in the cosmos, just much reduced to what it is. So if the astral elves are kind of the progenitor elves, and they are in the Astral Sea, they will absolutely be in opposition to the All-Seeing Empire, because everyone will be, because beholders don't make friends. Could the Astral Elves be allies of those nation that disappeared and are now bodiless? The Akmiri. Potentially, the Akmiri could absolutely have had connections to the Astral Elves. Elves had to the Akmiri, and I'm going to make a secret tag here, and this is going to be, let's tag that as Akmiri, and then we have to jump to Akmiri, and we want to go to Sovereign Council, because the Sovereign Council, which is the ruling body of the Akmiri, has a bunch of like high-ranking roles, and each of those is involved with different things. And as I thought, one of my current players was previously kind of like the Minister of Travel and Exploration. Is there one for other planes? Monitor of the Planes. Cool. So that is either Devani, who's one of the current players in my campaign, or Akash, who was the Monitor of the Planes, would have been the Akmiri that knew about the Astral Elves and had contact with them. This is important to know, because if Astral Elves do come up in this campaign, which is possible because they've come up in one of my previous ones, and Devani is still alive at that point, big if, because Devani's player is the one that's had the most deaths of anyone in my campaigns, then there's a very good chance that she's going to ask the question, have I met the Astral Elves before? So I need to figure that out, whether Travel and Exploration or Monitor of the Planes. I think Monitor of the Planes is probably the one. So we'll go secret, the Monitor of the Planes of the Sovereign Council dealt with them. And then that gives us the ability to say to Devani's player, yeah, you don't know about this. This isn't something that you know. Because the Akmiri, in their kind of like super powerful nature, didn't tell each other everything. They were like classic late stage capitalism society, very secretive. Like, no wonder they fell kind of situation. So we've got ideas on the cosmic origins. the commonly held folklore belief on Ishtar is that they all hail from the Feywild. The truth is that all elves come from astral elves. I like having that disconnect, that there is something that the people of the world believe, and then there is the truth. I like what we've got in terms of the relationship with the gods and worship between the 6 kind of sects of elves. I also like that we've got 6 different flavors of elf. That's just nice, and they all have distinct elements. So the Nyaran elves are arrogant and insular. The Eltride elves are nomadic and Mad Maxian. The Ravi are kind of like hot-headed sun elves. They've got a lot of like warrior elves. The Vestal are like space monks. So they spend a lot of their time weaving the Dor Rashana, which is this great tapestry. Think the Bayou tapestry, but records all of cosmic history. And they have like these silver eyes which make them blind to the rest of the world but allow them to see the tapestry, and they're the only ones that can read it. So they're there weaving all of the possible eventualities of every conceivable event in the cosmos. It's like an infinite room of just tapestry and just an infinite number of elves weaving. Very like high level concept stuff. The Drow, Lycia worshippers, like the fundamentalists of the elven people, and the astral elves, some kind of relationship with Trelos the Seeker in terms of their relationship with magic and the pursuit of knowledge and the destruction of magic, depending on what day you find Trelos on. And I think Trelos is going to have a real Terravingian from the Way of Kings aspect to him, in terms of depending on what day it is for Trelos will depend on whether it's like a knowledge seeking day or a destruction of magic day. And that will be an interesting thing to explore when it eventually comes up. In terms of other stuff for the elves, I think that's a pretty good place to call it for the elves. Like, I feel like I have a much better understanding of like fundamental stuff for the elves. Thank you for joining us, Jess. Enjoy your biscuit summoning. I'm pretty like, I feel like I have a good understanding of like a baseline level of our 6 flavors of elves from this. So I'll do what we usually do, given that it's like 9:30, so we would have been coming close to the end anyway. So we'll spend like the last half an hour of the stream just doing general chit chat. If you have questions about the world, about world building, about general GM advice, or any other questions along those lines, throw them in the chat, and we'll just hang out and shoot the shit for like 15-20 minutes before we call it for an evening. And I go and take my migraine meds and get into bed because my head is Swiss cheese, as it always is. In terms of what we're going to do in next week's stream, let me have a look. Oh, that's blinding. Excel, why are you so bright? So next week's stream, I actually don't have a topic for next week's stream yet. It will be some other world building thing though. The week after, I think, to end off the month, it is the last weekend. Yeah. So the 28th, I'm thinking that we do the first one of these like shop talk streams that I mentioned last week, I think it was. So last week I was doing a lot of prep for my coming year of content, and there was a lot of like industry relating questions during that stream, and I ended up talking about a lot of like behind the scenes industry stuff, like being a YouTuber, being a TTRPG designer, that kind of stuff. And that was a lot of fun, and I thought it would be really nice to start doing like a monthly shop talk stream where I pull some topics from what I've seen in the ether, or take some questions from chat, and we talk about some of the like more behind the scenes like goings on in the industry, and like more of the mechanically what it takes to do this job kind of stuff. So that's probably what we'll do in the last stream of each month, because that'll be a lot of fun. And I've got a couple of topics from this month that I think will give us some spicy conversation. Not having dark mode should be considered assault upon the eyes. I absolutely agree. Every time I open it and it's just white, it's like lightning. Really liking those streams. I'm trying to make an alien movies inspired dungeon, but I'm struggling to find inspiration. Would you have some in mind by chance? So other than like the movies, which would be my go-to place, I think that the first place that I would start for like going for something like that, an alien inspired dungeon, would be to like mood board it out and think, what are some of the key things that you want to pull from the films and translate into the dungeon? Like, is it tone that you're going for? Are you going for like atmosphere? Are you going for a feeling, or are you going for like a visual look? Do you want like the inside of the alien colony and all of like the drippies and like just how grossly wet everything is in there? Is that an element that you want to pull in? Or do you want to pull in like the just how slow that first film is for so long, and just the meta knowledge that you as the audience have, knowing that something is going to happen and just coming along at a real snail? Because if rewatch, Alien is such a good film, but when you're rewatching it, it feels like, especially when you know what's coming, it feels like it moves so slowly. When you're like, I know it's coming. So mood boarding it out and going like, what are the elements that you want to draw from that source inspiration, I think are really useful to like direct you, because then as you're making the dungeon elements and like as you're choosing monsters, you can go, right, okay, I've picked out 2 or 3 like core concepts for the dungeon. Does this monster match a couple of these elements? Can I choose monsters that will fit multiple of the criteria? So if let's just say we choose like that long suspense, so like not seeing the monster, and we also choose slimy, just for the lols. Can I choose a monster that's going to be like really stealthy and also slimy? Immediately ooze, because it's, you know, invisible if it's not moving. Ooze is a great option because it is just all slime. Another great option, I think, is a doppelganger, because doppelgangers have that sort of like wet skin look in my mind, especially when I think of them. I think of the Rebel Flesh from Doctor Who, and they've all got that sort of gross, sweaty look to them, which is just horrible. And just being able to constantly refer back to those pillars that you set at the start of a project, just really useful for anything that you're doing, be it making a dungeon, making a homebrew monster, making an adventure, whatever it is. Picking a couple pillars right at the start and going, right, okay, these are the things that I want to make sure I hit every time I'm introducing an element to this thing, and then bringing that in every time. Pro tip for Excel: set the background picture as a black picture to make all text white, function as dark mode. That is a good tip. How about having to keep moving and keep hiding from constantly moving aliens? So for like constant movement, I'd want creatures that have like AoEs or that have like aura effects. So if you stop, they catch up to you, you get caught in that aura. So there's an incentive for you to always be moving away from it, and kind of like that constant like treadmill of moving away from the creature, because if you stop and you stay in one place and the creature gets close to you, it doesn't actually need to physically touch you and physically get close to you, because it's that aura. I think aura effects in general are great for horror, because you can have the players roll for something when they don't see anything, when the thing's not there, they've just passed into the aura bubble. And then you can do a whole bunch of stuff with that. I love aura effects. I'm making a custom alchemical magic monster really inspired by the Xenomorph. The Xenomorph is just such a good monster. For what is basically a dude in a leotard, it's such a good monster. Doctor Who is such an unreal source of inspiration. I've been trying to make a fun mechanic around the Weeping Angels for the longest time. Honestly, Doctor Who, just any episode, almost any episode of Doctor Who makes for a great D&D session, especially if your players aren't Doctor Who fans, because you can just take it verbatim. It's one of my favorite, like, quick, no prep time things to do is just take a TV show or a film that I know that my players have no experience with and just whole cloth take the plot of it and just slap it into a Chepeku map and throw a fantasy monster in place of whatever the creature is in the show. And it takes so little brain power for me to do when I have, like, no time to prep. And I know that someone else has already done, like, the narrative hoop work, and then I know kind of like where the start, middle, and end is going to be because I've consumed that piece of media. But then also I have the context of my world and all the points of interest and all the other stuff that I've done prior to be able to take it in any directions where it needs to go. It's just such a useful thing to be able to do as a DM. And when the quote is, "Oh, you're only as good as your most obscure reference," whatever the quote is, like, super relevant for D&D or any TTRPG, just being able to slap down an adventure that is just something else with a coat of paint on it. It's just so useful. Dinos on spaceships, yeah, throw dinos on spaceships. Like, I've done the Rebel Flesh is one that I took so much inspiration on for my doppelganger plotline. I'm trying to think of other ones. So many. I like so many Doctor Who. Basically, every time I watch Doctor Who, I'm like, I'm going to make a note of that. But anytime I watch anything, really. A lot of mystery, thriller, crime serials. So, like Bones, Castle, NCIS, anything like that where there's like a mystery element to it is really good to take one of those stories and be like, right, what would this story look like if you just slap a fantasy facade on it? Really cool. I use the podcast lore for inspiration and consider that it's mostly accurate to some degree. The Time Hotel. As soon as I saw that Time Hotel, I was like, cool, yeah, bet that is going in my game at some point. Like, my goddess of time absolutely has a time hotel that just fits her vibe perfectly. Like, yep, just it's mine now. No, Doctor Who is a great source of inspiration. What time we got? 25 to 10. We'll go like 10 more minutes. So if anyone's got any other questions or anything that they want to cover before we call it an evening, go ahead and fire it off in the chat. That's what it is. It's not comments, it's chat. I know words. Yeah, the Rogue episode. Just a lot of... I've really enjoyed Shutagawa's series. I didn't like the Space Babies one because of their weird uncanny faces, but beyond that, I have been really enjoying a lot of the most recent series of Doctor Who. Just anytime Shutagawa's on screen, I'm like, oh, he's so handsome. And just all of the episodes have had really interesting central premises that I've enjoyed really, like, a lot. I've used the books between River Song and the Doctor as my character as a chrono mage and kept interacting with another in time traveler as well. There's just so many sweet points of inspiration to pull from Doctor Who, especially when, like I say, if you know that your players don't consume the source media, you can really go wild with it. Like, I've run games where my players are aware of the source media. Like, I've run a Hot Fuzz, like literally Hot Fuzz. They arrive in Stranford instead of Stamford, and it's the greatest village in the realm, and everyone's super happy. And immediately the players were like, "This is Hot Fuzz," and I was like, "This is Hot Fuzz," and everyone was on board for it, and everyone had a great time. And them knowing the source inspiration can be really fun, but also them not knowing it and you being able to just be like, cool, here's just an adventure for the week, and I don't have to turn my brain on as much because I know what this is also really good. Like the Hot Fuzz session, instead of the neighborhood watch, I had a Medusa that was like petrifying people and turning them into like statues throughout the village to make the village's rustic aesthetic more appealing, so they could win Village of the Year. And they would gather all of the people of the village together, and instead of having the neighborhood watch, this Medusa was like mass charming the village to be like, this is the greatest town in the world, we'll do anything to ensure it remains the greatest town in the world. And just the whole session, the players knew exactly what it was. They didn't know it was a Medusa, but they knew what the tone was, they knew what the gimmick was, and knew where their place in this ridiculous story lay. And it wasn't cheapened at all by them figuring out their own Hot Fuzz immediately. If anything, it allowed them to play on all the little subtle hints they put. Like, all of the NPCs were named after the actors and crew in the show or the movie, with the exception of like the most obvious ones. Like, there was no Simon Pegg or Nick Frost, but everyone else was like the lesser known actors and crew was the name of all of the NPCs and stuff. So as they were going on, we finished and someone googled Hot Fuzz and they're like, hang on a minute, all of these names look familiar, wait a second. And just having that immediate connection point can be really fun because everyone's in on it, everyone understands, oh, this is exactly what this is. At Christmas, my partner ran a Christmas one-shot for us, and we all just got like the tone of it immediately. It was very like Nightmare Before Christmas Eve. There's sort of like a horror in the snow, and the vibe of it, we sort of all picked up on it immediately and all just went with it. And just when everyone immediately picks up what you're putting down and nobody struggles against it, those are some of the best sessions. I think that it's one of my favorite things to do when I'm running for people I don't know, or running kind of like through playtest groups or groups of other YouTubers and stuff, kind of getting them together and being like, you're all on the same team, your goal is to make sure everyone else has as much fun as possible, and you all need to buy into this and just have like buy into it with the intention of having as much fun as possible. And approaching your games with that kind of mindset, I think, makes them so much more fun versus like coming into a situation and be like, well, I don't understand why my character would be bothered about this thing. Your character would be bothered about this thing because your character is you, and you're bothered about this thing, and you want to have fun with your friends. Figure out why your character is bothered about this thing. Get in gear, get on board, let's roll some dice and have some fun. Like, the quicker you can get to that point of just saying yes to the thing and being like, cool, I'm fully on board, the better. Like, anytime I have guested in actual plays, I feel like my role in actual plays is always like, I am the person that will kick down the door knowing full well that it will explode, purely to move the story along because I know someone has got to do it. Beyond that, I exist only to make the other players at the table laugh. And if my character dies, I don't care. Like, what happens to my character is inconsequential to me so long as everyone else at the table is having as much fun as possible. And I feel like if you all approach the game like that, everyone just has an absolute blast. I ran a Christmas themed one shot, but I could not as I got the flu just before I was going to run, based on Home Alone. The players were Harry and Marv. I loved that idea. I ran a Poltergeist one shot for Thanksgiving a number of years back. The puns were painful. I love a good pun-filled session, for the most part. One of my players has got an awful habit. If someone comes into the room while I'm running or something, if I need a moment, I'll say, bear with me. And they say, there's a bear with you. And it's become a thing. So I just try not to say bear with me as an expression of I need a moment now, because it was just every single time. And it was relentless. And then the bear puns would follow on. And I just can't. I just can't. Let's have a quick look at the schedule. So next week we're going to do another World Buildery stream. The week after we're going to do some shop talk to close out the month, and then after that, all things being equal, we should be able to do the Monster Manual review stream. So that week, the first week of February, I should have my D&D Beyond copy of the Monster Manual. Excuse me, and we should be able to do a stream diving into some of the monsters. I'm not going to do like a cover-to-cover thing. I think what I'll probably do is choose a bunch, a selection of the monsters from the Monster Manual, the new Monster Manual. And we'll pull up those monsters and the 2014 monsters, and we'll like deep dive into the comparison between them, and we'll do kind of like game designer looks at the difference between them sort of stream versus just a flat reading of all of them. One, because I don't want any Pinkertons turning up at my door, and two, because I don't think that would be as interesting as diving into some of the like, oh, why has this changed, or what's the impact of this change going to be for a couple of specific monsters. I want to look at some of the like basic classic monsters, so skeletons, goblins, things like that. Maybe a couple of dragons, and then look at a couple of like tentpole D&D monsters, things like a mimic or a displacer beast, things that you look at when you think D&D monster, like a mind flayer. When you think D&D monster, that's the roster of monsters that you have in mind, owlbear, that kind of thing, and see whether the new Monster Manual executes the vision and the fantasy of those monsters better than the 2014 version. How it does, if it does so, and why it doesn't if it does not. I want to get a sense of the Monster Manual by taking like that slice of iconic monsters and comparing them to the 2014 and figuring out whether or not this new Monster Manual is both going to execute better monsters but also like better execute the fantasy of those monsters, if that makes sense. And I think that should be a really fun stream as well. For fun games, I've used names that Monty Python would be proud of, and I go full into it. Yeah, like I like a serious game. My go-to tone is more on the serious side, but sometimes just pure nonsense is a lot of fun, and it's nice to break up the tension with some pure nonsense. Speaking of pure nonsense, I have a whole bunch of pure nonsense to deliver to you all as my outro for the evening. So if you've got any last questions, comments, thoughts, things that you want my opinion or advice on in terms of world building and GM advice and stuff, throw them down in the comments. While your brains are percolating on those things, I am going to do my usual end of the evening minstrel dancing for his dinner thing, where I give you a whole bunch of links and tell you where you can find me and all that stuff that anyone that exists on the internet has to do. So while you're thinking of questions and things, I'm going to do those. So this evening I have been using Legend Keeper. I'll put the link there for anyone that wants to watch the video, because I know that people often ask what program I've been using. And then I'm going to drop a link to our Discord server where you can come and hang out and chat with a whole bunch of people about a wide variety of TTRPG topics. We've got sections for players and GMs and map making and all sorts of areas over there. We've also got a meme channel if memes are your jam. If you want to help support the channel, you can sign up to the channel memberships and dive deep into the world of Ishtar, my homebrew world, get more exclusive access to videos and stuff. You can do that just below this video. I think there'll be a button somewhere. But if you want more written content, you can sign up to my Patreon, get new content every month, and then get issues of SIDEQUEST, which comes out every quarter now. Bigger, better, uncut, South Park. Or if you want to pick up some of my other digital stuff, you can find that over on DriveThruRPG, which is also linked there. I believe that is all of the shilling I have for this evening. My Stream Deck doesn't have any more shill buttons, so I have danced for my dinner. I hope that you've enjoyed this stream this evening, and that you found it useful and inspiring, and it's made you want to go away and create your own stuff and tinker with your own world. If you have any questions or topics or things, keep them in mind for future streams and let me know. I'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. But until next time, happy gaming.